guys, welcome to this first video game review. Previously I've done reviews of video games in text and I've put them on my blog. This time we're going to do things a little bit differently. We are going to just simply put me in front of the camera and I am going to tell you what I thought of the game. So I just recently finished playing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I have a lot of things to say about that game. Now, I don't think it's going to come as any surprise to anyone who's read my earlier video game reviews that I will talk a lot about the negative aspects of the game. But before we do that, I just want to bring up some of the positive things that that I feel about the game. So yeah, positive things. Well, first of all, it is extremely huge. It's a big open sandbox type of game, and I think it's like the largest Hyrule has ever been. And I really enjoy that because you get the feel of this is really a kingdom for once. I mean, not even back in Ocarina, I felt like, no, it was more like closed off areas. You transitioned from one area to the next. It was never open, and of course a lot of that was down to the limitations of the system, but that just makes this all the more epic because this was really huge. This was like you could go anywhere basically. And also I like the story. I like the story that is told, specifically the backstory, because you get this feel that there's this legend. Not trying to spoil too much, but there's like this legend of Ganon and how Link and Zelda have been like reincarnated over and over, and how they've beaten him in the past. I particularly like a segment of the game where you get to see the story played out in sort of like wall painting wise, you know.
The history of the royal family of Hyrule is also the history of Calamity Ganon, a primal evil that has endured over the ages. With the passage of time, each conflict with Ganon faded into legend. So listen closely as I tell you of this legend that occurred 10,000 years ago.
And that part of the game is actually very beautiful, and it almost made me sort of it resonated with me because it really felt like I was hearing the story about the legend of the earlier games. It didn't really matter which game you could connect with, but like regardless of what game you feel nostalgic over, that was sort of the story that they talked about, like Link, Zelda, and Ganon in the past.
The Guardians were tasked with protecting the hero as the divine beasts unleashed a furious attack upon their terrible foe. And when the hero wielding the sword that seals the darkness delivered his final blow, the princess used her sacred power to seal away Calamity Ganon.
Now, I will say this, it is very non-specific. They do connect to the earlier games, but in a very vague way, except for like the legend of 10,000 years ago, and that is obviously not in any of the previous games. Like, they built a lot of towers, and Ganon is like this all omnipotent monster, god, sort of primal force. And that is kind of interesting because I really feel like it really gives, it connects in a number of ways. I mean, it connects in the direct way when they retell the past, but it's also like you can make your own connections. For me specifically, it's like seeing as how Ganon is just this sort of like primal force now, and basically he has sort of like I kind of, they never said that, but I kind of make the deduction that the Triforce of Power has sort of transformed him over the millennia from this very colorful character that he used to be into this, like, he's basically lost his mind now. He's just this kind of force for evil, and he needs to be stopped. So that sort of indirectly made the connection as well. And, you know, another thing that bothers me just a little bit is the fact that Ganon in this game just doesn't have any character whatsoever. I mean, he doesn't say one word throughout the entire game. He's completely quiet, the silent antagonist. But I don't know how to feel about that. No, actually I do. I don't like that. Because even though I did say that I do like the fact that he sort of has this connection with the previous games, like by now the Triforce of Power has totally mutated him, transformed him into this godlike monster and whatnot, but at the same time it kind of takes away from what Ganon actually was in the previous games. There's like, you don't even get, like, you don't get any badass dialogue, you don't get any feedback from the villain. Like, the only time you face off against Ganon is in the last final fight. He doesn't taunt you, he doesn't do anything, it's just him, you kill him, and then everything is fine and dandy. And another thing that doesn't really get mentioned at all is the Triforce. I mean, the Triforce does not get mentioned at all, even though it is like depicted everywhere in like stone statues and wall reliefs and all of that. It's like they don't mention the Triforce. I do not understand. I mean, the Master Sword is in it, but the Triforce? I mean, you can see the Triforce when Zelda uses her power, but they don't mention it. I feel like they should at least have mentioned the Triforce in relation to why Ganon is the way he is, what makes him so powerful. They literally don't even mention what the hell he is, where he came from, how he came to be this threat that comes back again and again and again. And I get that you actually, if you want that backstory, you have to play Skyward Sword, or at least like any of the other games. But for a first-time gamer that plays this, you really don't get anything. Like, why is there a big swine monster that's here? They should have brought up the Triforce. That was sort of a glaring omission in my eyes. And obviously, as I said, 10,000 years ago, he was already that monster, so I make the deduction that the previous games had to have taken place like even further back than that, and that just makes the whole thing daunting to me. And there are specific things that actually do connect Breath of the Wild to the older games, specifically the for instance, the ranch, the Lon Lon Ranch, the ranch ruins. Almost brick for brick, it kind of recreates the Lon Lon Ranch from Ocarina of Time. Of course, it's now ruined. And then you have like Cass, who says, like the accordion playing bird, that says, I mean, he stands there and is playing Epona's song, and then he tells Link that, oh yes, this was taught to me by my teacher, and he told me that this was a legend about, allegedly, this was the song that the old hero, or like a hero summoned his horse with. So that's also kind of, yeah, we get it. And of course, there's like the Arbiter's Grounds. There's tons of stuff that's there. Temple of Time, of course. And then, of course, there are geographical inconsistencies. If you really want to try to connect Breath of the Wild with the earlier games. However, I feel like you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt, because very rarely has any Zelda game ever geographically been similar to any other game. I mean, yes, Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds. I haven't really played Link Between Worlds, but I think maybe that's sort of similar. I don't know. So that really didn't bother me that much. And I will say also that I did like the novelty of being able to cook, gather materials, and just find out different recipes. And yeah, that was actually very. It wasn't really original, but it was interesting. Even though it did frustrate me a bit sometimes when I actually needed a lot of resources and I didn't have that on hand. And specifically the acorns, you couldn't target them with the Sheikah sensor, so that was annoying. But anyway, I digress. Alright, now let's get into the negative parts of the game that I feel need to be addressed. And I have like 3 or 4 major problems with the game, and I feel that if they're gonna make another Zelda game, they really need to take that to heart. I don't have any illusions that any developers are gonna watch this video, but still, I kind of feel like I just want to put it out there and maybe get some feedback from you. Alright, so the first problem I have with the game is that it doesn't really feel like a Zelda game. Make no mistake, it is a good game. I'm not saying anything else, but it's not really a Zelda game per se. I feel like the developers watched or played Skyrim a little too much, and then when they were making this game, they were like, yeah, let's do that. Let's do something like this instead. Because of that, this game sort of deviates from the original Zelda template, and it's a little bit too open and free, to be honest. I do like that on one hand, because it gives me more freedom, and I'm all for freedom in games, like non-linearity. I love that shit. But in a Zelda game, I don't know. I feel like there should be some restrictions. For instance, and that's also one of my issues with this game. When you start out, you go through this tutorial in a place called the Great Plateau, and in that tutorial, you basically get every single item that you will ever need. It's not really called items anymore, it's called rune powers. But yeah, and that kind of just brings it down to another level. In the old Zelda games, for instance, you would get access to new items in every dungeon, but you actually had to go through those dungeons in order to get the items. Usually you'd have to fight the boss, and in whatever creative way, you had to use the items in questions to defeat the boss. Now, that in turn would give you new abilities, which in turn would unlock new areas. It would give you access to larger portions of the map. Here, it doesn't feel like that is a thing anymore, which I guess could be construed as good or bad. In my opinion, it's not bad necessarily, but it's definitely not Zelda. The second problem that I have is the enemies. In a big game like this, I would expect there to be like tons of different enemies, like tons of creatures, different things that would attack you, or that you just maybe just like animals. Granted, there are, but with the enemies, there is maybe a handful of enemies, and then there's like elemental variations of them. Like you've got the choo-choo, and then you've got the ice choo-choo, and then the electrical choo-choo, and then the fire choo-choo. Then you have the Lizalfoss, and of course you have the electrical Lizalfoss, the ice Lizalfoss, and the fire Lizalfoss. It's like, and they do this with every enemy, more or less. Like, at least every enemy that's sort of like, and even the bosses, like Thunderblight Ganon, Windblight Ganon, Waterblight Ganon. It's like, come on. Yes, elemental variations are cool and all, but don't do this for every single enemy. It's like, no, that's just, I don't know. To me, it felt like a cop-out and just a very cheap way of designing enemies. My third problem with this game, and my biggest gripe by far, is the minimalistic approach to music. I don't know where to start with this one, because there is almost no music. And that really, really disappointed me, because Zelda to me has always been about, you know, these grand orchestral scores and these epic songs that you heard, like tracks you heard when you were riding across Hyrule Field or entering the towns or whatnot. In this game, I just feel like, first of all, when you're in the middle of nowhere, there's absolutely nothing. There is birds chirping, there is maybe wind blowing or something, but there is no music at all. Maybe you'll hear like some notes here and there, but it's very, very, very scarce. And then even like where you're supposed to hear music, like in the towns, it's still like a thing. I feel like when I played the game, I thought the developers actually, they must have like had the volume turned down or something, because you really have to strain your ears to hear the music. Like, I guess what they were trying to do was like, oh, let's make this more realistic. Let's have, let's just have the player face the great outdoors when they're riding the horse. Actually, when they're riding the horse, there's some music involved, but it's just a few like plinks on the piano, and there's like, what? I mean, the difference between, let's say, Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time, when you're riding, and Hyrule Field in Breath of the Wild. So that basically really, really dragged it down for me. I was really disappointed in the lack of music in this game. Even people who, like, there are people who try to defend it, like, but what music you do hear is great. And I'm like, yeah, but you still have to really listen closely to hear it. You basically have to stop what you're doing and turn up the volume to hear it. And to me, it just felt like the developers accidentally must have left the volume, like the musical volume, very low. I don't know what happened. Like, there has to be some mistake to this. And my final problem with the game is, of course, the ending. Now, I will say, I did go through all of the shrines. I beat all 120 shrines. Didn't get all the Korok seeds, but I didn't really feel like that mattered. So I got the original outfit, the clothes of the wild, if you will. I got the Hylian shield, the Master Sword, and all that, just for the sake of it, because I felt like, yes, now it's Zelda. Even so, like, I don't know if I expected more, like, from the very first Zelda game on the newest console, the Nintendo Switch. I felt like the ending was really, really underwhelming, especially when you compare it to Ocarina of Time, which has an ending that goes on and on and on and on. And I know when I was a kid, I was like, this is a really, really long ending, but now I kind of feel like I appreciate that ending a lot more. But I also kind of feel like this is something you have to expect nowadays. I have been so disappointed in endings for AAA titles almost on a regular basis now. I don't know what the problem is with developers. They give us these grand epic adventures, and then they get to the endings, and it's extremely anticlimactic. It's like, you can do this, and you can do this, and live your life, and do this epic quest, and all of that. This is greater than life. This is larger than life. And then it's the ending. It's the end. And then there's like the DLC. Now, I haven't downloaded the DLC. It's 200 kronor. It's a little bit too expensive for me, but I feel like maybe someday I'll download that and check it out, because I know for a fact that the Champions DLC has some more lore content, and you know me, guys, I'm all about the lore. So maybe I'll check that out, but not now, because now I've done it. I've done 120 shrines. It's like, I need a break, you know. Now, grading is going to be a hard one, because I don't really know how to put this. I mean, as I said, it's a good game. It's just not a Zelda game to me. Even though I will admit that a few things did try to redeem the game in the stereotypical Zelda fanboy's eyes. For instance, the Divine Beasts did keep a lot of the Zelda template intact, because the Divine Beasts did feel, for better or worse, like true Zelda dungeons. However, they were very short, and that might be because there were a lot of shrines. I don't know. It feels like Nintendo tried to experiment a little bit here. Did it work? In my opinion, nah. It barely kept the game above, like, water, you know. It felt like it could have been better. It could have been better. So grading. Usually I grade the games with Death Stars, going from best to worst. 5 Death Stars is the best. The worst is a destroyed Death Star. This game will get, I think, 3.5 Death Stars. Because it's a good game, it's just not a good Zelda game. Well, or, I take that back. It's not much of a Zelda game. What was there was awesome, but I don't know. I just don't know if it's possible to reconcile freedom, complete freedom on one hand, and the Zelda template on the other hand. They did make an attempt. It was an honest try, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So yeah, that's basically it for this review. I think I'll do this from now on. Just post a video about it and just put it up on YouTube, and then link it to my blog and all of that. So next time, I don't know what game I'll review next time, but we'll see. We'll see. That's basically it for me. Take care, you guys. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you. All right. Goodbye.